3. Uh, it's good to see those of you who are here, as I can see those who are gathering tonight as we continue our study as it relates to the providence of God, the providence of God. I'm going to ask media to get my scriptures on the back wall, please. Um, as it relates to the providence of God, we've looked at uh, the providence of God from quite a few angles, if you will. We've talked about how why most people have problems with the providence of God is because um, it's hard, it's invisible. And, anyone and everyone would, I guess, would have a problem with believing something that, first of all, they cannot see, and second of all, it is just hard. It goes against possibly everything that we seek to believe and want, which, God says his thoughts are different from our thoughts and ways are different from our ways. Then we looked at how the providence of God is mysterious through the life of Abraham and the promise that God made toward Abraham, but then the request that God made for Abraham about killing Isaac, his son. And then we looked at how the providence of God is not coincidental, it's not by chance, it's not by fate or circumstances, if you will, through the life of Moses, how everything in his life, just down to the moment, to the second, how he was found in the Nile River, who he was found by, and all of those things, just the timing. But none of those things was coincidental. We talked and proved from text that those things were the movement of God's hand, the providence of God, not coincidence or fate. And then after that, we looked at Jacob and Joseph on last week. And what we talked about in regards to Jacob and Joseph was how God's purpose is fulfilled in history, especially when it looks like it's working what? Against us, when the truth of the matter is working for us. We could see that in the life of Jacob. We could see that certainly in the life of Joseph, where one may think that with what was happening in his life, being sold into slavery and all of those things worked against him. But we saw that that was the providential hand of God causing those things to work for him. And we tried to take those principles and let those principles be things that we would apply in our lives, because sometimes in our lives it looks like things working against us, when the truth of the matter is they are working for us. And so I wanted to try my hand tonight, if you will, at talking about something that sometimes is sensitive. First of all, many think that God is silent on certain things. And when people think that God is silent on certain things, then they think that gives them the liberty or the freedom to kind of make their own decisions or involvement, or directives about those things. Well, let me help you out. Y'all, God is not silent on anything. Everything that we need to know about anything, God has spoken to it. And watch out for folk who try to trap you with saying that God didn't specifically say this, he didn't specifically say that. Well, he specifically told us what sin is. He specifically told us, we specifically know what is morally good. We got specifics in a lot of things. So even though God didn't specifically say, thou shalt not do LSD, crack cocaine, because that's people who would like for the Bible to be progressively updated. The very fact that if you are a child of God, your body is the what? It's the temple of God. And so the Bible speaks against, people getting drunk, even though people think it doesn't. That's why when you see those phrases like a little wine or drunkenness or things like that. So the Bible is not silent on things. It's just that we like to have our own interpretation of those things and agree that since he didn't say it specific, then now you have the ability to come to your own conclusion. And where that plays and wreak havoc in the life of many people is a subject I want to broach tonight. Kind of deals with, I guess you could say, politics, evil nations, government, and things of that nature. Because you hear people talk all the time as if to say that God can't be a good God, because if he's a good God, he wouldn't be letting certain things happen. Well, again, the providence of God, as we talked about, as we gave our definition about it, is actually where God, through his wisdom, he purposefully uses his what? His sovereignty. And we told you that sovereignty is God's right and God's power to do whatever he pleases. God has the right and he has the power, the omnipotence, the almighty power to do whatever he pleases. That's what sovereignty means. Well, the providence of God is God using wisdom with his sovereignty to purposefully, if you will, ladies and gentlemen, to move things to the end or to the conclusion that he desires. And that's not some things, ladies and gentlemen. That's all things. That's all things. What many don't like is the way he do it, and they can't believe that he would do it that way. So since they can't believe he would do it that way, they would rather think that God has nothing to do about it. I'm going to talk about some world powers in a minute, but I want to just kind of plant this seed with you tonight as we talk about providence and how many people have a problem with God's providence because they don't understand how he demonstrates his providence over evil people or evil nations. People who get into political fights and plant political flags and become, more than patriots, if you will, because they believe they have some freedom or some rights or opportunities or choices to do what they seek to do because God hasn't spoken to it. While I'm kind of warming this up, I didn't give you these scriptures, but Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, and Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Again, that would be Daniel chapter 2, verse 21, and then Romans 13, 1 and 4. While he's doing that, I want to ask you a question. As a believer, what do you think you know about Russia's war with Ukraine? Don't want no answers. I just want you to think what you know. You know, there are those camps who would say, Joe Biden is the reason why that war is going on. If Trump was in office, that war would never go on. Well, maybe that's why he ain't in office. Because of the providence of God. But what is it you think that you know about Russia and the Ukraine war? Do you think that is happening outside the scope of the definitions I just gave you of those two words? Do you think God's sovereignty, God's providence, is playing no role at all in that? And then you would think, well, how would he use the invading of that country? How can he use that for his glory? I'm going to show you tonight from the Bible. God been doing that since day one. And then tonight, we let people walk up to us and plant seeds in our heads to make us think that, yeah, Trump did this or Biden did this or some political. I want to get back to talking about the providence of God, the sovereignty of God, with the ability to do whatever he pleases to do. And then he uses his providence to wisely and purposefully use those things. I know tonight, because we have people here of different ethnicities and probably different parties, this is going to, poison you a little bit or make you mad at me, but just listen to the Bible, and then we'll see what God has said. So, back to that question. Whatever you think you know as it relates to Russia's war with Ukraine, remember this. God may even allow a certain measure of freedom to evil forces in our world to bring about his purpose. Like Habakkuk. If we view life from God's perspective, what you're going to see in Habakkuk, the same thing happened. Habakkuk basically almost describes what happened with Ukraine and Russia. Habakkuk, if we view life from God's perspective, our purpose will be to worship the Lord knowing that he is in control of all things. Not Trump, not Biden, not an elephant, not a donkey. Not a libertarian. God is in control of all things. You have to be at least my age or older to get this. I'll just chunk this out. God is even in control of Chads. Everybody my age, y'all know, yeah. The millennials and the Generation Z gonna have to Google that, because y'all remember Chads with Bush back in Florida, today and all that. Yeah, God is in control of Chads. Okay, y'all got it. All right, okay. Not CHAZ, Chads. Those tablet things that was, holding on those voting things that, yeah, okay. Another question before we read those verses. As a believer, what do you think you know about China taking over Taiwan? I could talk about, North Korea. What do you think you know about it? For instance, if China were to successfully annex Taiwan, as if they've been trying to do, against the will of the Taiwanese people, doing so on the heels of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it will severely undermine international order by again demonstrating that countries can use coercion or force to unilaterally redraw borderlines, because that's literally what Russia is doing with Ukraine. It would be almost the equivalent to you waking up tomorrow morning and tearing down the fence between you and your neighbor's house and just declaring their backyard is yours. And if you get away with it, some other folk gonna try and get away with it and do it. If China were to station its military force on the island, the United States will find it far more difficult to project power to defend against its treaties and its allies. So you got to understand, the United States, they got a working relationship with Taiwan. And they have military situated, near and around. And if China come and take it over, anyhow. So the U.S. defends because, first of all, they are, part of, allies, and the U.S. influence would dwindle because its allies would question the U.S. commitment to defend or either accommodate China or pursue any China's strategic autonomy. In other words, a war in the Taiwan Strait would also halt the production, and I looked this up, y'all, semiconductors, which are mainly produced in Taiwan. If China gets Taiwan, it wipes out semiconductors around the world. Yeah. It would paralyze global supply chains, ushering in severe economic crisis. Finally, if China were to take control of Taiwan, it will spell the end of liberal democracy and have chilling effects on democracies around the world. So it's vital for the United States to deter China from using force or coercion to achieve unification with Taiwan. So the United States is trying to, not let, deal with China and tell them, don't do it, because if you do it, it's going to create problems for everybody, and we all going to be at war fighting then. While China is threatening that with Taiwan, Putin is literally doing it to Ukraine. And if any of y'all know anything about the Republic of Russia, prior to 1991, all those little countries, which include Ukraine, once was Russia. But they, kind of restructured the line. That's why now you have Belarus and all these other places now, right around there. But once that was Russia, up before 1991. Well, Putin want to come back and take them kind of all the way back to the old thing. And now you say, well, what is that? What's that got to do with the Bible? Well, I'm glad you asked, because I need you to understand something. With everything I just said, with the president of China, with Putin in Russia, and Joe Biden, it don't matter who would have been in office of the United States president. You got to understand all those things, ladies and gentlemen, all those things still are under the sovereign, providential hand of God, so that his purpose will be fulfilled in the end. Over 20-something years ago, I guess at this state, over 25 years ago, I taught you guys some things about, end times and revelations and what's got to happen, and all these things have to happen. And we talked about one world religion back in the day. We talked about, how parts of different countries would be destroyed. And I remember some of y'all asking questions like that. It sounded like, and I wasn't being no prophet. I'm just telling you what the Bible said. Well, to come to this conclusion, to set off the wars, to create the one world religion, to create the political and then the religious fight, so that there will be some cataclysm and some major destruction, so that major parts of the world will be destroyed. Y'all, all of that fulfill God's plan. It got nothing to do with Trump. It got nothing to do with Biden. And it breaks my heart when I hear Christians make those statements, because you make it as if Trump or Biden is greater than the providence of God. All these things are happening as God has purposed them to happen. That's what the providence of God is about. We just don't like the way it's happening, but that's the way God has chosen for it to happen. World power, one world power, take over another world power, another world power. I taught you guys this years ago. We used to go over this prior to Bible study. But if you remember the Bible timeline of Old Testament history, first it was the Egyptians, all right? Then they got defeated by the Assyrians. Then the Assyrians got defeated by the Babylonians. And then the Babylonians got defeated by the Medo-Persians. Then the Medo-Persians got defeated by the Greeks. And then the Greeks got defeated by the Romans. By that time, Jesus was walking around on earth, and New Testament started popping in. It's always been one enemy defeating another enemy. Are y'all hearing what I'm saying? And because Rome was in power at the particular time that Jesus was walking on the earth, all of that is God's plan. Had nothing to do with Nebuchadnezzar's. Had nothing to do with any of those kings at that particular time. Matter of fact, this particular verse, I think I asked you Daniel 2 and 21. Let's look at that, Daniel 2 and 21. It says, it is he, meaning God, who changes the times and the epochs. It is God who what? Removes kings and what? Establishes kings. He gives wisdom to wise men and to knowledge to men of what? Understanding. God does that. God had Nebuchadnezzar's in the place that he wanted him to be when, he was going to do what he was going to do through that evil ruler. The Bible tells us God who appoints the seasons and the kings. But I voted. What? You think God's providence is not more powerful than your vote? Well, then why do I need to vote? Because you got a right to do it. Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. Watch what this says. Every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except from God. And those which exist, wait a minute now, are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. So, we have to submit to government. But watch this. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Oh, I don't hear what I said. Hear what that verse said. You don't get all scared because of who in office. You don't get all scared because who the leader is. Because we're God's children. For rulers are not a cause for fear of good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have the same praise. You will have praise from the same. Do what you're supposed to do in regards to government, except for when it calls you to what? Sin against God. That's what Daniel did with the king that he was under. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, then you need to be afraid. For it does not bear the sword for nothing, for it is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. I don't know if you hear what I'm saying, or what the Bible's saying there. God said, I got this. I got this. Just like when the Assyrians thought they was messing over the Egyptians, they didn't know I had already set up the Babylonians to mess over the Syrians. And then when the Babylonians who messed over the Syrians, who messed over the Egyptians, thought they was getting over it, they didn't know that God created the Medo-Persians to mess over the Babylonians, to mess over the Syrians. You know what I'm saying? God said, I got this. I'm the one who allowed these world powers to come into place. Let me just run something by you, and then maybe this will set the context, and then we can run through this quickly. I'll just highlight it. About 4,100 years ago, God made a promise to Abraham about his descendants. About 4,000 years ago, Jacob, Israel, was born. About 3,900 years ago, Joseph is sold into slavery. About 3,400 years ago, the Exodus begins. About 3,400 years ago, Israel begins establishing itself as a sovereign country. As a sovereign country. Remember that. Sovereign country. Because that's exactly what Ukraine was identifying itself as a sovereign country. About 3,000 years ago, David becomes king of Israel. We fast forward about 2,700 years ago, the Assyrians, again now, conquer northern kingdom of Israel, God's people. Evil kingdom conquers God's people. The Babylonians then conquer the Assyrians. Then the Babylonians, because they conquer the Assyrians, they now exert influence over Judah, which is God's people. That happened about 2,600 years ago. Then Babylon attacks Judah. Babylon destroys Jerusalem and the temple. King Nebuchadnezzar, who's in office now, Cyrus the Great, which is a part of the Medo-Persian people, he conquers Babylon. Then Cyrus releases the Jews from Babylon captivity. Then the Greeks begin to rule over the land of Israel. And once the Greeks begin to rule over the land of Israel, then guess what happens about 2,100 years ago? The Romans take over the Greeks and over Israel. And then what happens? Jesus is born. Then about 1,900 years ago, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple. Guys, that was wars. That was evil people having evil wars, sometimes over God's people, who wasn't always good. Remember that. But God would allow an evil empire, an evil king, ruler, to take over his people, all for the process of the providence of God for Jesus to end up here, a babe lying in a manger. So, when we talk about Assyrians and Babylonians and Medo-Persians, Greeks and Assyrians and all that type of stuff, those evil wars, all these things that happen, you think that has something to do with who was in office? We got to quit thinking like that. We got to quit letting people talk to us like that. Because they plant seeds in our head that now causes some things that we're going to see here in just a little bit, because I'm a little unhinged tonight, and I realize that. To see some of the things that have happened, even what happened January 6th a couple years ago. That could happen even again tomorrow. Because there are folk who think they're Christians, who believe they're patriots, who believe it's their duty to do something to stop something, as if God is not in control. Some of y'all got to see the looks on y'all face right now. So let's go to our opening statement. We'll cover this in 25 minutes. If God could not control evil, he would not be God. His sovereignty demands that he be in control of what? Everything. Even dreaded nations such as Babylon. The evil nations, Putin and China, y'all, they're not doing nothing out of God's control. And then you got Christians running around here talking about it like it was Trump's fault, or I know it's Biden's fault. It's out of God's control. All those things. Let me put it to you like this, in a way that should go. All those things are working together for good. All those things. All those things are under God's control. So he said, if the God we serve can't control evil, don't have authority over politics or politicians or stuff like that, y'all, we are helpless and hopeless. And we don't serve a God like that. Opening thought. There's an important distinction to be made between God controlling evil and God what? Creating evil. God is not the author of sin, but he can use sinful men to attain an objective. God can use struggles, heartbreaks, and tragedies in ways to bring about his glory and our good. Such events, even though we don't understand the reason for them, are part of his perfect divine plan. See, we never would have came up with, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to let the Egyptians come, and then after the Egyptians, we're going to let them get destroyed by the Syrians. Then we're going to let the Babylonians destroy the Syrians. We never would have came up with no plan like that. Because all those things fulfill God's plan. And when you understand Old Testament time, and when you understand who was in power at what particular time, now you understand prophets like Jeremiah and Isaiah and Ezekiel. It just makes the Bible even clearer. Daniel. Even clearer. Let's look at Habakkuk 1, verses 5 through 11. Because this is prophecy in which God relates his intention to raise up Babylon, a ruthless and a dreaded nation, to achieve his purpose. This raises the question, God, does he sometimes use evil to accomplish his plan? So let's read these verses. This is Habakkuk. See, this is that book y'all be skipping. That's why y'all think God don't talk about it. And this some books y'all skip. Habakkuk chapter 1, verses 1 through, 5 through 11. We'll go with that. It says, look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. Boom. Notice what he said right there. I'm doing something in your days right now. If I told you about it, you wouldn't believe it. And y'all, we could say amen to that right now in our day and time. For behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans. What? You're raising up enemies? Yeah, that fierce and impetuous people who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Come on now, every once in a while, y'all got to give Pastor Boston an amen or something right there. This ain't nothing new. Y'all up here tripping like what happened with Ukraine and Russia. Man, we ain't never seen this before. What? Have you read the Bible? He said they were dreaded, and they were feared. Their justice and authority originated what? With themselves. Don't y'all see Putin making up his own laws, his own justice? Don't you see Mr. North Korea, Kim Jong, whatever, y'all know, making up his own? Don't you see? Come on, y'all. Their horses, which just, let me just say it like this, just kind of help you understand. Their military might. That's what this would speak of. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle swooping down to devour. That's them rockets they done sent to, anyhow. All of them come for violence. Their horde of faces move forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock at kings and rulers are laughing matter to them, no matter what. If Trump was in office, that never would have happened. Come on. You really think Trump would have stopped Putin? Y'all, God is in control of this. It ain't got nothing to do with Trump. It ain't got nothing to do with Biden. This is providence. This is the stuff that leads to the book of Revelation. So they mock at kings and rulers are laughing mad at them. They laugh at every fortress and every heap of every rubble to capture it. Then verse 11, then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on, but they will be held guilty, those whose strength is their little God, little g. Y'all not hearing what I'm saying. When I read those verses, all I can remember is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Everybody know what Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 say? What it says? Trust in the Lord, lean not to thy own understanding, but in all thy ways, what? Acknowledge him, and he will what? Direct your path. Y'all, see, we come up with our own understanding how to figure this out. This is what we'll do. No, we don't get to trust and lean on our own understanding. We're to do this to lean and trust on the Lord's understanding. So in Habakkuk chapter 1, we're going to see the rise and fall of evil empires. When we assume that God is on the side of our nation, I'm talking about America right now, all right? I know I'm going to get in trouble right now. But when we assume that God is always on the side of our nation, we make this assumption at our own peril. The assumption, which is usually made from the vantage point of jingoism, I'm going to tell y'all what that means. I know you're saying, what does that mean? Yeah, you see it all the time, and people don't even know what it is. It's actually jingoism and chauvinism. Those are actually the two words. So the assumption which is usually made from the vantage point of jingoism and chauvinism is made from that rather than from sound theology, and it rests on at least two other assumptions. Well, let me tell you what jingoism is. You can Google it afterwards, but you got to trust me for now. Jingoism is extreme patriotism. Did y'all hear what I said? Jingoism is extreme patriotism. It's a form of aggressive, warlike foreign policy. That's what jingoism is. Now, I'm going to tell you a time when jingoism existed, and most folks don't even know what it was. If you remember, for example, in the wake of the World Trade Center attack, September 11, 2001, President George Bush gave a speech that many consider to be a jingoism. In his speech, Bush extolled the virtues of the United States, and he vowed that those responsible would be found and brought to justice. That's jingoism. That's him saying, extreme patriotism. We're going to get you back. And chauvinism is exaggerated or aggressive patriotism or excessive prejudice support for one's own group. Them folk that you saw climbing the walls in D.C. on January 6th, that was some chauvinism. That was extreme, over and above aggressive patriotism. The first is that ours, meaning America, is a Christian or godly nation, or that our nation always act in a godly manner. See, that's how we like to think. Matter of fact, when President Ronald Reagan was president of the United States, he once referred to the former Soviet Union, Russia, as the evil empire. I don't dispute that assessment, especially when you think about all the atrocities that were committed during the regime of Stalin. But what about America? I tell you, one of the best books I read, I know now it's been maybe 30 years ago, a little bitty book entitled, Can God Bless America? Why would God bless America? When we think of all of the stuff that we do endorse as a nation. So even though Ronald Reagan once called Russia the evil empire, what about America? Could not our own nation at times warrant the epithet evil empire? Think about America. It's sheer arrogance to assume that our nation always acts in a righteous manner and is always in that right. And that's how other countries see us. I dare you to leave America. Matter of fact, one of my media guys just got back from Europe, and they told me, he said, Pastor, man, they were rude and they was this and that. And once they find out you're Americans, that's because of how they think, we think, and what they think about us. Jingoism and chauvinism, all those things play a large part of that. America and its arrogance to assume that we're always right. The issue is not so much is God on our side. The issue is, are we on the side of God? The second equally dangerous assumption is that God always sides in his immediate providence with the most righteous nation in a dispute. Get that again. See, this is another thing people assume, that God gonna always side with the righteous nation. I can show y'all in the Bible, God ain't always sided with the righteous nation. The Bible is full of the record of God using more wicked nations to chastise less wicked nations for the purpose of his what? Providential rule. Y'all, that's the situation that burdened the prophet Habakkuk. Now let's go back to reading those first 4 verses. Thank you, media, for keeping me straight. Chapter 1, verses 1 through 4. We read verses 5 through 11. Now listen to this is the first verse in the book of Habakkuk. Listen to what it says. The oracle of Habakkuk, which the prophet, he was a prophet, saw. How long, O Lord, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry out to you, violence, yet you do not what? Save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look on wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Verse 4, he says, therefore, the law is ignored and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted. See, what happens during Habakkuk's day is God uses an enemy to come down on God's people. And then why is this happening to us? Why is this happening? And God is basically saying, because first of all, you ain't listening. You ain't recognizing me as God. And God said, I will use other nations against maybe more righteous nations. I'll use more wicked nations against more righteous nations to get your attention, to show you, first of all, I am God, and to turn you back to me. Did y'all know in Europe that Ukraine is known as the Bible Belt of Europe? Ukraine, the country of Ukraine, is the Bible Belt of Europe. That is the place where you have the freedom to be a Christian, or more Christians, missionaries, and all that stuff. I've got friends with Ukraine. We've been there, and that's basically like the Bible Belt, the text of the United States, where Ukraine is the Bible Belt of Europe. Anybody understand now why Ukraine is attacked? Turn over. Habakkuk was a patriot. He loved his own nation and was distressed with the circumstances of his historical situation. Israel was being oppressed by a foreign enemy, and Habakkuk complained that God was not hearing his pleas and was refusing to save his people in the midst of the violence. Later, Habakkuk continued his protest. Now let's go to verse 12, 13. Listen to Habakkuk's protest. He's talking to God. Are you not from everlasting? See, now you know you're too grown now, right? See, this sometime when I get around here, and y'all know what I say, Lord, don't let me hit the rock, Lord, don't let me hit the rock, because I can't let y'all cause me to go against God like they did with Moses. Listen to what it says. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? I don't know if he's saying that facetiously or not. We will not die. You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O rock, have established them to what? Correct. He established the evil enemies to correct God's good people. Your eyes are not too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? There again, God is letting wicked army, wicked people swallow up the righteous people. Habakkuk was having difficulty reconciling God's holy nature with his seemingly unholy providence. In other words, okay, I know you're a holy God, but the way you functioning, it don't seem right. And you know what? There are Christians today say the same thing. Well, if God is God, then why would God be allowing that to happen? You know, and so what Habakkuk literally is saying here, he's saying, listen, I know you're God and you have a holy nature, but how is this stuff happening in regards to your providence? This unholy stuff is happening in regards to your providence. Reading on. He complained that God was too holy to even gaze upon wickedness, to look at it. Yet he seemed to be overlooking the obvious evil of their enemy. Habakkuk raised the supreme question that arises from every study of the providence of God. Why do you look on those who deal treacherously and hold your tongue when the wicked devours a person more righteous than he? Habakkuk's complaint was that God seemed to be favoring the wicked, or at least the more wicked, over the righteous. The bottom line of Habakkuk's protest was that God was not fair. Habakkuk removed himself to his watchtower to await an answer of God. He was determined to hear God speak in his own divine vindication, even though God had spoken early in terms that should have what? Silenced Habakkuk. Think again what God says in verse 6 through 8. Let's look back at that, what God says in verses 6 through 8. He says, for behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people who march through the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate with themselves. Their horses are swifter, lepers are keener, and wolves are in the evening. Their horsemen come gathering, their horsemen will come afar. They will fly like an eagle, swoop down to devour. I mean, just based on what God has said to him there, that should have been enough to silence Habakkuk. See, the problem is that in Habakkuk is that God was using the Babylonians and evil people to accomplish his will. Our wise and perfect God, sometimes he can and does use sin, if you will, the sin already existing in the world. God sometimes uses sin already existing in the world to fulfill his purpose. Sometimes God will use sin that's already existing in the world to fulfill his purpose. Even if somebody let it out of a lab in China. I don't care what the hypotheses are. COVID wouldn't have been here if God didn't want COVID to be here. So you can blame it on Trump, you can blame it on Biden, you can blame it on some dude in the lab. We can go with all these other things, y'all. It doesn't matter. God can use sin and evil, if he will, to fulfill his purposes. The perfect example of this, watch this now, in Jesus' crucifixion is Jesus' crucifixion. This is not on your notes. This is my other notes. The murder of Christ was an evil act, but through it, God redeemed his elect and disarmed the demonic powers and the authorities, Colossians 2:15. In Habakkuk's day, God's purpose was to bring judgment on Judah for their idolatry. Babylon was just the instrument for his judgment. Jesus wouldn't have died if it wasn't. You better be glad Jesus died. You better be glad that Judas betrayed him. You ought to be grateful that the scribes and the Pharisees was hating him. That, all of this stuff that you would think that this shouldn't work out, this shouldn't be working, when the truth of the matter, it works exactly like God planned. He was crucified by the people that he planned to be crucified. Everything worked to his plan. Y'all, I'm going to say this again. That's from the Assyrians beating the Egyptians, the Babylonians beating the Assyrians, the Persians beating the Babylonians, the Greeks beating the Persians, and the Romans beating the Greeks. All those evil empires work to fulfill God's plan. That's his providence. God functions like that. He uses evil. It's not that he again creates evil, but God can use evil to fulfill his purposes. God's revelation called Habakkuk to then ask, how could God use a nation wicked in Judah to judge Judah? God's response was a promise that he would later punish Babylon as well. We're going to look at that. In the end, Habakkuk could only acknowledge that the Lord's perfect wisdom. The prophet ends with a song, and that's what chapter 3 is all about. Once he realized that, you know what, God, I done talked too much. I done spoke too much. I done got out of bounds. Look at Judges 2:11 through 16. Yeah, good time. Judges 2:11 through 16. Now, remember what we're talking about here. In the book of Judges, we're going to see this refrain repeated. Notice what it says. Yeah. Then the sons of Israel did what? Good in the sight of the Lord. See, America, we sit around here acting like, why God letting all this happen to you? Can I help you out? We doing evil, y'all. And then you got Christians going in the voting polls, and because they are more committed to a party, they'll vote against God's will. Because they committed to a party instead of truth. God says, then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals, and other worship the false gods. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. You know the story about that. And followed other gods from among the gods of the people who were among them and around them, and they bowed themselves down to them. Thus they provoked the Lord's anger. You know why God raised up the enemy? Because they provoked God's anger. God said, I delivered you, I did all this for you, and then you get out here and you join the very... So they forsook the Lord, and they served Baal and Ashtaroth. The anger of the Lord burned against Israel. America. This nation. And he gave them into the hands of the plunderers who plundered them. And he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them. Those captivities, y'all think God didn't know his people was going into captivity? Just like you act like God didn't know that the Israelites was in Egypt for 400 years. You think God didn't know that? All that worked to the good for Joseph to get to Jacob to fulfill. And this is why I get in trouble with people, especially people whose melanin is darker or lighter than mine. I can show you all through the Bible where God did such atrocities, including slavery, to fulfill his purpose. It said, the anger of the Lord burned against Israel, and he gave them into the hands of the plunderers who plundered them, and he sold them into the hands of their enemies around them, so they could no longer stand before them. In other words, fight against their enemies. God said, I'm going to make it to where you ain't no strong nation anymore. Wherever they went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil. He ain't talking about the evil enemy. He's talking about his people. He said, wherever God's people went, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil. As the Lord had spoken and as the Lord had sworn to them, so they were severely distressed. Couldn't do nothing about the economical situation. Couldn't do nothing about the stock market. Couldn't do nothing about the price of gas. Couldn't do nothing. So then the Lord raised up judges who delivered them from the hands of those who plundered them. Now, you got to remember, judges came in after judges who were strictly more like military and things like that. Then came kings, and things of that nature. So you got to understand, ladies and gentlemen, This is not the first time in the history that God used evil empires and their rods to chasten his own people. This is the point of Habakkuk should have known. God may empower a wicked nation for his own, for us, for a season, but it's always just for a season. Somebody get that a little bit. God gonna fulfill his promises. God gonna fulfill his promise, but he can let the enemy come against you for a season. That season may be a year, that season may be a decade. You know what I'm saying? But it's just for a season. They're only over you and empowered over you because God is allowing it. These wicked nations always get their just reward in the end. The great kingdoms of the world history have all become corrupt. Every one of those kingdoms, even that last one we spoke of, Rome, the Roman Catholic, corrupt. They've all come corrupt. They've all fallen in due time, a time that is in the hands of God's providence. Eventually, Habakkuk came to understand the words of his own book. Look what he says in Habakkuk 2:20. You're familiar with this, Habakkuk 2:20. He said, y'all said sometime, the Lord raised up judges. In Habakkuk 2:20. Habakkuk 2:20. While he's finding, the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silent before him. You hear people say that all the time. The Lord is in the holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Well, y'all, thank you. Eventually, Habakkuk came to understand that the words that, remember, he's a prophet in his own book. Even with everything that's going on, he went to, wait a minute, hold on. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. Somebody gonna get this in a minute. One thing America ain't is silent. We all got something to say. Well, let me leave that alone. When God revealed himself to Habakkuk, the prophet was reduced to terror. Look at what happens in Habakkuk 3:16 and 19. 2 more minutes and I'll be out of this thing. Yeah, he says, I heard and my inward parts trembled. At the sound of my lips quivered. Decay entered my bones, and in my place I trembled because I must await quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who will invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there be no cattle in the stalls, yet I will exalt in the Lord, and I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. Y'all know what? It's people in Ukraine are still rejoicing through everything that's going on. It says, the Lord our God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds feet and made me walk on high places for the choir director on my what? Stringed instruments. Basically, when God revealed himself to Habakkuk, this is the prophet being reduced to terror. While Habakkuk was voicing his complaint, God was in his holy temple. The earth was not keeping silent before him. Habakkuk was not keeping silent before him. You know, because we want to say what we want to say. You know, we want to do what we want to do. You know, instead of sitting still and waiting and seeing the salvation of God, we want to come up with our own rules. Said when God manifested himself to the prophet, he was reduced to quaking in terror. Out of his terror, however, came a renewed confidence in God's providence, and I wish that's what we'd have beginning tonight. He learned the cardinal point of faith that whatever comes to pass, y'all hear me? Whatever comes to pass, no matter how calamitous it may appear in the moment, there is a reason for joy and confidence. Person who puts their trust in God's providence acquires feet like those of a deer who's able to walk, as it says, in high places. Tiptoe through the tulips, if you will. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you heard that last part. And I say it again. Out of this terror came a renewed confidence in God's providence. Out of whatever is happening in the world and around the world, we should have a renewed confidence. We need to remember that whatever comes to pass, no matter how calamitous it may appear in the moment, there is a reason for joy and confidence for those of us who are in God. So even if it is the wrong person is in office, God is still in control. And ultimately, whatever happens during that time, for those of us who are in Christ, guess what, y'all? We still should have joy and confidence. We ought to be at the point that if we die, fine. You know, if America get blown up by a bomb, I'm saved. Fine, I'll go be with the Lord. Well, if they send something over here that cripples the economy, you know, and we have to live from day to day, then if the struggle is going to be to the glory of God, then to the glory of God, we should still have joy. We've gotten so comfortable and so relaxed till we feel and function, like I said, with jinglism and chauvinism, as if we are owed something. And that's where you get terms like Proud Boys and all this other crap. As if you are owed something. You are due something because of your jinglism and your chauvinism and because of your patriotism to a country. Our patriotism must be to God. No matter what we go through, we must trust in his providential hand. I don't apologize for the passion. Thank you so much for joining us.